how does it work when you don't fully vet individuals who are entering the United States? How can that, or how does that ultimately lead to fraud?
Countries in which fraud practices are widespread, when those nationals come to our country, it is only logical to believe that in many cases they may continue those practices.
Sanctuary city policies are ruining America.
The whole point of sanctuary cities is essentially for those jurisdictions to exempt themselves from federal immigration laws that they don't like. I think one of the things that is perhaps not necessarily digested by the American public is that if you are here illegally, you have to commit fraud in order to accomplish anything in the United States, because you can't work without appropriate documentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this hearing to address the staggering levels of fraud that we've seen. They're in Minnesota, but I believe it's the tip of the iceberg. And we heard my colleague from Florida talk about that it's estimated that maybe 10% of what we spend every single year actually ultimately is frauded in some way, shape, or form, and the American taxpayer deserves better. When our debt climbs by the trillions at this point, and we are putting that debt on the backs of our children and our children's children, we absolutely have an obligation to ask questions. And that's exactly what we're doing here today. So I want to start with Mr. Hankinson. I want to begin by you. You served for years as a Foreign Service Officer at the State Department, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I understand that your role there, obviously adjudicating visa cases and investigating fraud. So you've had kind of been on the front lines of this, so to speak. A recent DHS Inspector General reported, it highlighted that during the Biden-Harris administration that the State Department issued more than 26 million non-immigrant visas to about 15 million people. And of those 15 million, the State Department said that they waived the interviews and fingerprinting for more than 8 million of those people. That same report highlighted that CBP were not notified that those foreign nationals had not been fully screened by the State Department. Not only does that open our nation up for grave national security risk, but by waiving those interviews and fingerprint requirements, they make it dramatically easier for foreign individuals to fraudulently obtain visas. So my question is for you, based on your experience, how does it work when you don't fully vet individuals who are entering the United States? How can that, or how does that ultimately lead to fraud? And how can future administrations make sure that we are fully vetting and that we're actually, crossing every T and dotting every I? And what is the end result of that?
Well, I think the idea of fully vetting is a bit of a myth, because if you have, say, an immigrant visa applicant from Germany where they have excellent records, they share them with us, and you have that person's identity and civil documents that are trustworthy, you can be pretty sure that person is who they say they are. Excellent. If they don't have a record, they don't have a record. If you have an applicant from Somalia or from Mali or somewhere that has much worse records, then you're much less likely to have an accurate result. And in some countries that I've worked, you have people who have marriages that are testified to only by villagers who are illiterate. So they've maybe had a statement printed out for them that they've signed with a thumbprint. That's not really something you can rely on. And then often criminal records are in places like Afghanistan just simply aren't recorded. Everybody in the village knows, but unless you can go there to check, you have no way of knowing.
So how can we better, how can our system be better to prevent fraud in the future, visa fraud in the future?
Well, from my perspective, if in doubt, you don't issue. You want to make sure that you know who it is, that they are who they say they are, and that they don't have a criminal record or any other ineligibility. And if you can't be sure, then you simply just don't issue that person a document.
And Mr. Linderman, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you, Senator. In my remarks, I emphasize that State Department actually keeps country by country fraud summaries on the encounters that they meet in that country. This is an unclassified document in which you will find for Somalia, Nigeria, name the Mexico, name the country, a collection, a very deep dive into corrupt practices, fraudulent documents, and other information in which American diplomats, consular officers encounter fraud. And this is a valuable tool so that you can actually make some intelligent judgments. Countries in which fraud practices are widespread, when those nationals come to our country, it is only logical to believe that in many cases they may continue those practices. And so I would say this is not a judgment based on race, ethnicity, or whatever. It's based on facts. And consular officers keep very good records, as my colleague Mr. Simonson just mentioned. And when there is doubt, visas should not be issued. But there is a holistic approach that we can do as well. We can turn to a government in which a foreign government in which it basically condones corrupt practices and say, we will hold you responsible for this, foreign government. We will stop adjudicating visas in your country until you clean up your own documents, you clean up your other corrupt practices.
Yeah, demand better. Let me ask real quick, Mr. O'Brien, we've discussed the topic a lot, particularly in the last couple of weeks, about sanctuary cities. And it is my belief that sanctuary city policies are ruining America, and that both we can keep our law enforcement officers safe and we can keep our American citizens safe by cooperation on the state, local, and federal level. And that cooperation, I think, is incredibly important, and I've long thought that we should defund sanctuary cities. Obviously, there's a public safety risk, which I have just hit on, but can you discuss how those same policies enable individuals to actually defraud American taxpayers?
Sure. I mean, the whole point of sanctuary cities is essentially for those jurisdictions to exempt themselves from federal immigration laws that they don't like. So they become a major magnet for people who are trying to evade the laws and are trying to commit fraud. And I think one of the things that is perhaps not necessarily digested by the American public is that if you are here illegally, you have to commit fraud in order to accomplish anything in the United States, because you can't work without appropriate documentation. You can't open a bank account. You can't operate a motor vehicle. And so all of these places, in refusing to cooperate with federal law enforcement in order to remove immigration violators, make themselves preferred locations for committing fraud, because they're magnets for people who are trying to evade enforcement by engaging in fraudulent activities.
Thank you so much, Mr. O'Brien. I think we need to end sanctuary cities now.
Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Beer, I'm impressed by your analysis and your presentation, and I thank all the members of the panel for their presentation. But I'd like to follow up with a question or two. Big, bold, beautiful bill, President's budget, approved 18,500 new agents, ICE agents 10,000, 8,500 CPB agents. I believe that Secretary Noem has identified their training period to be 47 days as a tribute to the President, the 47th President of the United States. When I talk to police chiefs and mayors back home, they say you can't prepare an officer for contact with the public in that short a period of time. Do you have any thoughts on this subject?
Oh, absolutely. It is reprehensible that they're cutting back on training at a time when they're asking officers to do things that even long experienced officers have not had to do: conduct random traffic stops, do crowd control, all of these things, profiling people in the street, all of these things that were never done by Immigration and Customs Enforcement before is now being done as a mandatory policy. So there should be more training rather than less when you're asking more from your officers.
And so the question in my mind is, what are they going to do with all of these people as they're learning on the job with weapons in their hands, wearing masks so they can't be identified? It's speculation in Washington about detention facilities. How many there will be? 8, 9, I've heard 15 detention facilities. Our present Bureau of Prisons population is around 160,000. We have more people in jail than any country on earth, more people in jail than any country on earth. And now we're going to build detention facilities that house another 150,000. Visualize, if you will, the America that they're designing for us in the future with those parameters.
Look, they're clearly not concerned about the welfare of the people that they're arresting. I mean, they are detaining American citizens even and putting them in these facilities and not giving them access to attorneys. They're not letting them make phone calls. And then they're often released without charges, but that doesn't make the wrong correct. And so now when you're going to have this huge bureaucracy of people pulling people off the street and shoveling them into warehouses where they're essentially black boxes. Lawyers can't get in, there's no oversight. There's very little due process, and the due process that there is, they're constantly attacking and trying to remove it. So you need greater oversight, you need greater protection, but they're not putting any of the money into oversight and accountability for these facilities.
So the president's been very clear what his goal is, hasn't he? He's told us he's going after murderers, rapists, terrorists, criminally insane, childhood predators. The worst of the worst, he says. How are they doing on that score?
If you look at all the people that they booked into these facilities, just 5% in the most recent available data had violent criminal convictions of any kind.
1 out of 20.
One out of 20
fits that category. So you get 19 people that are not culpable, not liable, not criminally responsible in any way, and they are the ones who are being swept up into this detention.
Even more tellingly, the administration itself assigns a threat level to each detainee. And we can look at, within the data, how they categorize these people. Just 8% are categorized at the highest threat level, and 73% are not given a threat level at all, deemed not a threat. And so you look at what they're actually saying in their own administrative records, they don't believe these people are threats either. And they don't care, because it's not about public safety. It's about the population purge. And it by all means necessary. It doesn't matter if it makes us poor. It doesn't matter if it takes away our rights. It doesn't matter if it harms you, takes your wife, and sends her to some foreign country.
I just have a few seconds left. I commend to you the case of Miramar Martinez in October, who was shot on the streets of Chicago. A teacher in a Montessori school. She was shot in her car 5 times and survived. God knows how. She survived. And what happened to the charges against her? 8 weeks later, dropped. All charges. Could be because the vehicle she supposedly rammed had been moved from Chicago to Maine to be repainted. So it wasn't any evidence in her trial. To think of what has happened to this 30-year-old woman's life, born and raised in Chicago, an American citizen, shot by these ICE agents on the streets of Chicago.
And they bragged about it.
They brag about it. He was one of the shooters said, "I got 5 bullets and 7 holes." Quite a shot. He's very proud of himself.